Okay, hello. This is Max Melchich from the CUDAN Open Lab in Tallinn at Tallinn University in Estonia. Today is our Open Lab seminar keynote number 4 in fall 2024, which is Alexandra Arkhipova on Necrospeech, longer title in a second, which is a little bit special, let's put it like that. Because so far in the last 4 years, most of our speakers were decidedly on the quantitative, computational, large-scale visualization side. This will be both qualitative and quantitative, but it will be, it couldn't be more timely. Yesterday, or less than 2 days ago, Assad left Damascus, which is another one of these cases where this kind of topic is salient and important. And so what we're going to do a little bit is we're going to give you a 2-minute introduction why we invited Alexandra. We, in this case, is Mikhail Tam and myself. Mikhail Tam is originally from Russia. I am originally from Germany. And so I brought you something which you may sort of like appreciate as a kind of, let me say, as a kind of intro that is maybe a little farther back in history than you may think. So what you see here is from Max Planck, a talk, Positivismus und reale Außenwelt, so positivism and the real world. And this was given in 1930 at the Harnack House in Berlin. And one of the interesting things about this is both in reaction to the time, he says, there is no nonsense without believers, but we have to make one step into the metaphysical, which is that there is one real world. So as scientists, we try to get evidence from that real world. And obviously we have to overcome the shortcomings of our cognitive apparatus, our eyes. We have to get around the shortcomings of our measurement instruments, and we have to overcome the multiplicity of opinion that sort of emerges from the fact that nobody's perfect. This is something which is a premise which we very much follow in cultural data analytics, where we try to sort of like make sense of the world, but also trying to find out the biases. And this kind of enterprise is not only something that you can do in a kind of quantitative fashion, but also in a qualitative fashion. Sometimes qualitative is the only thing you have. And sort of in resonance with what we hear today, I want to sort of like bring to the attention 2 things which sort of have to do with the fact that on the one hand, sometimes only the thing you have is qualitative observation. And here, this is sort of like the evidence for that. Victor Klemperer, Lingua Tertii Imperii, the language of the Third Reich, which was basically written 1 page at a time on a typewriter, smuggled out of the house because he was Jewish and sort of like always shortly before being deported to a KZ. And this thing has all the hallmarks of like what sort of like totalitarian speech entails. He also has a whole chapter about like how parts of Hitler's speech actually came out of the US, such as, for example, the saying 100%. So whenever you see 100 in social media, it's actually coming from right-wing Americans in the 1920s. Another thing that you may actually appreciate is this thing, which is a novel. Nevertheless, it's cultural data analytics. This is a novel originally called Erfolg, which means success in German. It's not a thin novel, written by Leon Feuchtwanger, who emigrated to the United States. And this thing was written, in essence, before the war, while nevertheless, sort of he saw it coming. And that is one of the interesting things, that when you sort of like listen between the lines, you can actually see things rolling out, such as you know, Agenda 2025 in the United States, sort of like trying to do mass deportations. It's the kind of stuff where you only believe afterwards, while you totally could see it coming if you just listen to the right words. But some of these words never happen. There's other things that are not spoken about. So this thing is sort of something which we're all confronted with when we deal with the rise of totalitarianism, when we live in totalitarianism, and we have to deal with totalitarianism like generations after. I am one of these kids. I still had a grandpa who sort of like was a Nazi, and the other grandpa he deserted the Nazis. So happy to have one of those. But the key thing is, it's sort of something which is really, really hard to deal with. And it's totally something which takes generations. So what's happening right now, we will totally deal with for the next 60 years. And very, very, very rarely, you actually get an insight into this kind of thing by people who have expertise in the particular country, expertise in the particular method, and the right evidence, and know how to look at to actually give us a record of that. And that is, in some sense, what Alexandra Arkhipova is doing, and where is her expertise, and that is a truly amazing situation. Let me point to another book, which I have not with me, I forgot in the office, which is by Wilfried Trotter, The Instinct of the Herd in Peace and War, which was written in 1919. It's a British person living in Germany, basically seeing how it was on both sides. And these kind of things are fundamentally important, and we cannot just sort of like engage for career purpose in, say, computational social science, quantitative digital humanities, visualizing nice large data. But at some point, you have to actually get to the point and actually deal with the situations, deal with the stuff that is currently going on. And for that reason, I, at least, are super, super happy to have Alexandra Arkhipova today, and I'm pretty sure we will learn a lot. And I give the word to Mikhail Tam, who is from Moscow and may have a number of words to say.
Well, I will try to be as short as possible. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Because why is my hand? I think I don't know. Anyway, I would say that I have been in Russia for 3 years. And it is, even for those of us who have an experience of living there and sort of living there most of our lives, it is very easy to lose contact and lose understanding of what's going on, especially in the last years after the start of the war, because the society is changing, and it is sometimes very hard to understand what is inside the minds of the people, and how and what are the tools which are used to make people accept what is going on or support what is going on, and to what extent there is a resistance to that, and sort of non-conformity. And as far as I can understand, probably in the, well, beyond the Russian-speaking community, there is even much less understanding, and it is completely sort of a black hole, which people don't understand what's going on there. And I think that probably one, two, three people who know the most about what's going on there, who collected the largest amount of data and interpreted it is Alexandra, and I think it is sort of extremely important to make this story known for beyond the sort of community of Russian speakers, to make it a part of sort of general discourse in social sciences beyond Russia. That's it.
Thank you. Cool. Thank you. Alexander, if you're ready to share your slides, the usual thing we're doing is we spend 2 hours together with talk and discussion. The most simple way to do it is 40 minutes talk plus sort of the rest discussion. You can take questions between, you can talk for 2 hours, we can have only a discussion. So it's up to you, the stage is yours and you own it. And so basically, we're looking forward to it.
And we need to finish 10 or 15 minutes in advance, as far as I remember, yes? Or
Alexandra, do we
do you hear us, Sash? Do you hear us now? Okay.
Yes, but I'm hearing some echo.
you have to switch off your mic.
I switched off everything, I think.
Okay.
Just anyway.
Okay.
So guys, thank you for inviting me. It was the nicest introductions basically I ever heard. So I'm going to talk today about, I don't know, 40 minutes, maybe 45. I will be very thankful for discussion. Unfortunately, there is one small problem that I will have the next class of mine in 2 hours. So it's at 6 Paris time and at 7 Tallinn's time. So so maybe I will going to leave you, unfortunately, with my heart broken at 5:40 mine time.
Okay, good.
So let us start. And so today you were talking about special occasion, and so because basically we are not discussing such things, and this is a special occasion and especially for you, this is a title, and a little bit change my title. So the title is Necrospeech, the special language of specially military operation. And but before I start to talk about this very specific language of war, I would like to present myself. So whom am I? Basically, my basic training, I'm a linguist and a philologist. And during my previous life in Moscow, in Russia, I was studying many things, including classical ethnographic methods. It means that I was like interviewing people. I was doing a field work. I was going, I don't know, deeply in the Mongolian desert, and I was interviewing people and collecting information, but also I was applying semiotic methods to them, and I was making a lot of quantitative data analysis in social media and in Russian newspapers, specifically when I start to investigate, to research not only some distant areas like Mongolia or South Siberia, when I spend a lot of time, but when I start to investigate how can I put it, a Russian political protest and the way how people are protesting. So I will study street protest and the specific forms of coded language. In Russian, we called it langue Aesop, Aesopian language, and that's how I ended up with studying the language of war. And today I was going to talk about qualitative data analysis and quantitative data analysis, but I should warn you, the quantitative language data analysis, which I'm going to apply, is very primitive. It's not like you used to use. Basically today, what the main framework, the main shape of my talk today is basically it's a field of so-called linguistic anthropology. So it's a illegitimate child of two major disciplines, linguistics and anthropology. They have a bastard, illegitimate child. And linguistic anthropology, the people in this field, they research how people create their reality through words. And the term which sometimes is applied to this is wording. The set of the frame which the set of words, the frame which allows you to create a new reality. So for specifically this research, to this research, I mean the language of Russian propaganda, I was applying several absolutely different approaches. For example, I was interviewing people, a lot of people out inside Russia, outside Russia, but also I was observing what is going on in Russian media, and I was using several programs to collect data from Russian social media and from Russian media. I mean newspapers, and for that I was using Integrum Worldwide, so the hugest database of Russian current newspapers. And I was trying to track how Russian authorities they were using words, but I will show you later all about this. So, also before to discuss the Russian language of war, I would like to talk about James Scott's theory. He was an American anthropologist. Unfortunately, he died this year. And he wrote 2 books about his very famous concept of relationships between dominant elites and so-called subordinates. So subordinates, people in authoritarian and totalitarian regimes, they're people who doesn't have a public voice. And because they don't have public voice, they do have public voice, but it's a very specific type of public voice, because in the public space, people who are in power, they forced them to create so-called public transcripts. For example, in the Soviet Union, you need to participate in special rallies, demonstrations every 1st of May to show your loyalty to Communist Party. This is public transcript. And among themselves, these people, they are spreading another types of messages, so-called hidden messages, but it's not the main topic of our talk. Today we are talking about these public transcripts. I will go to show you an example. For example, after the war started, Russian authorities, they wanted to convince everybody that the war has a great support. So they started to create in public space this type of public transcript, and they forced people to participate in them. For example, to display loyalty, Russian citizens were forced to do it basically with their bodies. For example, here you can see at one of these pictures a big letter Z. It was made from children bodies in children's hospice in Kazan. And also another example, there was a letters Z and V on the big buildings. There are 2 dormitories, student dormitories in the city of Kazan. So on some of the windows, the lights were on and the lights were off in some of the windows. So everybody could see these 2 letters, Z and V. This is public transcripts. This is a big signs to show everybody, hyper signs that we all support the special military operations, means war in public sphere. And Necrospeech in Russian, Necroyas, it's my term, and it's and I use this concept for analyzing Russian propaganda language. And this Necrospeech it's a very important part of this public transcript. So the main goal of Necrospeech is to prove everything, that everything is okay, and what is going on is it has all the support of Russian citizens. So I choose this term, so I create this term to show this very specific type of language register. It's not like a real language. It's a register with two special functions. The first function of this so-called language is to conceal horror. So this language allows authorities to discuss war, death, and repression without any direct naming these things. And another function is that that language, that set of rules, it somehow kills the meaning of the words. People should listen to them without any understanding of them. It's very hard to imagine, but I'm going to show you all this in a couple of minutes. So all what I'm going to present today, it's not appeared like that, voila, and we have a new language policy. No. It was making by presidential administration, and presidential administration in Russia. For now, it's really Ministry of Internal Affairs. It's our main political division. And they were creating this specific language for many years since Putin took the power. And for this specific type of language, they invented inside themselves, they had a special inner term. In Russian, it's режим информационного благоприятствования, and in English and translated like exclusive public communications treatment protocol. In Russian, it sounds very strange because it has like very archaic, very Slavonic sound word благоприятствование. You never say so in vernacular way. So what does it mean? This exclusive public communications treatment protocol, it's a set of very specific rules. And with the help of these rules, presidential administration seek to change the perception of reality. How to change the perception of reality? More positive details, less negative details. For example, good guys, I mean Putin and high officials, they should be mentioned only in positive context. And this protocol became visible in 2012, 2014. I later will show you some data for that, but it was created before. Let me give you one example with the result of this protocol. Look at this picture, please. In 2015, there was a huge political scandal. Several high-ranking officials, including the governor, were arrested in Komi Republic. But they were charged with bribery and they were arrested, and the main Russian TV channel, the first channel, they broadcasted, they streamed online this arrest and later police search at the governor office. And when people saw this stream, this broadcasting, they found out that something happens with two portraits. And can you see this, that two portraits were blurred? Mm-hmm. And it happened because these two portraits were portraits of Putin and Medvedev. And Putin and Medvedev, they should be mentioned only in a positive context, specifically Putin. That's how this protocol works. The leader cannot be mentioned in a bad context. It should be only positive, always positive. When you have a situation that something bad is going on with some people, some high-ranking officials, then the boss should be covered somehow. So the typical example. And also, I should mention how this Necrospeech I'm talking about, how it was spreading and where it was spreading. So basically today, I am talking about the very specific sort of Necrospeech. It was spreading, and it is still spreading from the ministry, from the presidential administration, from the very specific group under the ruling of a guy named Gromov. He's a creator of this Necrospeech, and his people, they sent instructions to the editors of the main Russian newspapers, and these editors sent these instructions to journalists, and these instructions content like grammar, how to write news. And how I know all this? Because I have some sources. For this case, I have source. I called him Informant X, and Informant X was working in one of the big Russian state newspapers, federal state newspaper, and he decided, after the war started, he decided to dismiss himself, to cancel his position and to leave country. But I asked him to stay for a couple of months to collect inner information for me, what he did. So you are going to see these inner instructions, which were sent to journalists through the editors from the presidential administration, how to write news. And also before, to show you some proofs and some data, I'm going to be even more, how to say, boring. So I'm going to discuss the main methods of analysis. So the main idea of this necrolang is to use one words instead of other words. So what basically, sorry. What I'm doing, I'm applying a method of cross-varietal synonymy. So I'm taking the pair of words. I always need two words. One is normal word, for example, front. Front is normal word. And another is line of contact, линия сопротивления. Line of contact is a specific type of euphemism, which is specifically used by Russian media not to mention the word front, because front is somehow connected with the World War. To use this, I always need these two pair of synonyms, two synonyms, and I need to check how they were changing in time, their dynamics. So let us discuss how Russian journalists are writing news. I'm going to show you that they apply a they use very simple set of rules. This Necrospeech is very simple, and I'm going to discuss every rule. So, for example, the first rule. You all, of course, know what is euphemism, what euphemism is. Here you can see a funny picture how the euphemism was used in the advertisement of sex toy. They could not write. They could not write directly about the sex toy in their advertisement, so they put nice words about personal massager. And euphemism usually it's a shield. You're using euphemism when you don't want to be rude, when you don't want to show aggression. In simple words, when you are trying to use words as shield, so it's euphemism. But Russian journalists, they were instructed in some cases to use what I called super euphemism. What is super euphemism? Let us look at these examples. Friday, February 24, 2024, 4 days after the war started. Journalists of the very big federal newspaper, they got instructions from the editor how to write news about war. They were told, do not use the word war. We can say liberation, liberation operation, special operation, можно освобождение, освободительная миссия, спецоперация. Let's us forget for a second about special operation. Let's talk about liberation and liberation operation. Why they were forcing to use the liberation instead of war? Because of course the word war has a lot of very bad connotations, like catastrophe, death, mass killing, and so on and so on. And liberation has only positive connotation. So they were forcing to use what I called super euphemism, and you need this super high positive meaning. In 2 days, there were another instruction. Colleagues, I remind you, the word war cannot be used in relation to Donbass. Yes to sanctions war. Yes to information war. In other cases, only a special operation. So there is Caesar's total ban on the word war. This is super euphemism. This is very simple. As you know, everybody was thinking in 2022 that the war would be ended in 3 days, but it never happened. So in 3 months, those Russian journalists from that Russian newspaper, they got another instructions with another reminder to please, it was said there, please replace the phrase taken under control with the word liberated when reporting on the special operation. You cannot say taken under control, взят под контроль. You need to say instead liberated. This town was liberated. Why? Because taken under control, it's like a military term. And to avoid any mentioning of war, journalists were forced to put only these phrases like liberated territories. Even more, the people who are living in these territories, they cannot be mentioned as people of Donbass, for example. It's impossible. They should be mentioned only like compatriots. See the instructions below. Why? Because compatriots has a very positive meaning, and also it's something, it's a way to show that we and people of Donbass, we are both sharing the same territory, we are living in the same imaginary country. So those were super euphemisms. Of course, I should mention today that today I'm talking about Russian case, but of course, Of course, these examples very popular everywhere in the politician's speech. So you can find them anywhere. So it's not a special Russian invention. The second rule is to use euphemism. What is euphemism? It's something very opposite to euphemism. If you use euphemism as a shield, then euphemism, it's a way to play, it's a way to punish somebody, to show aggression, to make somebody suffer. It's a bad word. And also it was very often used in the history of modern society. For example, many years ago, Fidel Castro, he called those Cubans who left Russia, who left Cuba after the Cuban Revolution, he called them Los Gusanos. And Los Gusanos means worms. So it's a typical political euphemism. Russian journalists, they also were obliged to use political euphemisms, but these euphemisms, they should be applied only to Ukrainian side and to Americans, because you know who the real enemy is, the United States. Let us look at the instructions. Minimize the use of term VSU, means Ukrainian army. And the typical meta verb for instruction in this case, minimize. Minimize the use of the term VSU, preferable to names, Nazi battalions, neo-Nazi, Nazis, fascists. Нацбаты, неонацисты, вооруженные боевики, нацики, фашисты. In the summer 2020, the Ukrainian army was making a very successful counterattack, and the Russian SME, they were a little bit, the Russian media, newspapers, they were a little bit terrified, and there was a long instruction how to write news about Ukrainian counterattack. Look at this piece. It was said that in the material about the situation in front, it is recommended to minimize the concept of counterattack. And journalists, they were forced to use the term thoughtless attacks, aggression, or desperate rush. So Ukrainians, they cannot make counterattack. They only can be in a desperate rush. Let us look how this reframing is working, because what we see, it's reframing of language. So look at these three type of euphemisms applied to Ukraine. So in Russian newspapers, Ukraine very rare named as Ukraine. Usually it's called Kiev regime or Kiev junta, from the Argentinian term junta together, means the military ruling. So it's offensive, it's euphemism. Or former USSR. I'm inviting you to look at the blue line about former USSR. Why to say instead of Ukraine, former USSR is a euphemism? Because when journalists are writing, when journalist writes about Ukraine, like about former USSR, it means it's a former Soviet Republic. It's not an independent state. It never was an independent state, and somehow it belongs to us. Look at this scale, and you can see that. Look at this picture, and you can see that what is very obvious. All these three types of euphemisms. They were raised. Their number became bigger after the annexation of Crimea and Maidan. But in and of course in the last 2 years, it's became much more popular. But these graphs also shows us that these euphemisms, they not appeared now. They were creating this image, this idea of non-independent Ukraine for many years. So Ukraine was described as a failed state, not as a legitimate independent state. The most famous example, the most famous rule, and honestly speaking, my favorite, is so-called neutralization. A neutralization, it's a very specific type of euphemism. It has different goals than euphemism or euphemism. Neutralizing phrase, unlike a euphemism, dampens emotion rather than amplifying them. For example, it was liberated territories. It's a super euphemism because we are saying something very good with very good connotations about these territories. And like certain territories, this is neutralization, because neutralization is a form of camouflage that causes the listener to pass by because there is nothing of interest here. Nothing is happening here. For example, line of contact. This is a typical neutralization for front. What is line of contact? Without the context, we don't know what it is. It can be anything. I can touch you. It could be line of contact. If we are going back to my examples, and we can see again in the first instructions which was sent to the journalist in this publishing house, we can see that they asked to apply instead of war to say liberation or special operation. And liberation is super euphemism, and special operation is neutralization, because you don't know what does it mean. You cannot guess without additional details what is going on. This rule can be used in any context outside of war. For example, Mercredi, Wednesday, March 9th. So the first month of war, there is a financial crisis in Russia and financial panics. And these curators from the presidential administrations, then they sent to journalists instruction not to put the word restriction together with the word banks. Why is that? Because it could create panics, because restrictions, the board restriction has a lot of connotations, bad connotations, and presidential administration want people to avoid them, want journalists to avoid them. So they are asking to use instead a phrase, special order of giving money. What is special order of providing money? I don't know. Nobody knows. Maybe people are going to have to take money from banks according to their, the color of their eyes, or by their age. So nobody knows what the special order of issuers is. That's the point. So this is a typical example of neutralization. No connotation, no positive, no negative. Another example, this year, there was a tax presidential administration they created a new tax reform, but they don't want people to talk about it, so they ban Russian media to mention this tax reform as reform, to use reform. Instead, they ask Russian media to use word Donastroika. I had really hard time trying to translate it. I translated it like fine-tune recalibration. So anything, let us read this instruction from another media, but also again, it was sent from presidential administration. Colleagues, the topic of tax changes will come to life this week. Horror. Most likely, the parameters will be announced only on Friday evening, and a couple of events in the Duma will pass without specific. But there are some guidelines. Then see in big letters. See? Do not use the term reform. We will call it changes. This is strict. Please convey this to everybody, to everyone. Furthermore, one of the key points is that the changes will not affect the majority, and the nature of the changes will be such that families with 2 or more children will benefit from that. So no word reform, because reform, according to them, obviously in their mind, has kind of bad connotations, like liberal reform, revolution, whatever. But it's not a new term. Let us look at this graph. Again, it's this picture again. So I took, again, I applied these methods. I took these cross-varietal synonyms. One word is normal, reform. Another one is substitute from the Necrospeech. It means this fine-tuned the calibration, Donastroika, and then I measure the dynamics of these words during the last 25 years. And we can see, of course, because the number of newspapers was growing every year in Russian media. So I was counting every year the number, the total number, for example, in this case of mentioning taxes. And from the quantity of taxes, I was counting how many times the Nastroika recalibration was mentioned or reform was mentioned. So the methods is always the same. And you can see that, the tax reform were mentioning somehow, but in the last 10 years, the number of cases, the number of articles that will be mentioning this new term of newspeak, Donastroika, was bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And it was an inner language of officials. It was like their own language, inner language, but then it became an official term to use in their newspapers instead of reform. So, and it became a new Necrospeech term. And the most famous example, which everybody knows, it's gas explosion and gas clap. Again, there is a gas explosion. It's unfortunately it happens. Взрыв газа, and but also there is a very strange term in Russia. In Russian, it's like a very technical term. It came from the Ministry of чрезвычайных ситуаций. And it was used usually by firemen and technically it means when first gas clap means when you have a gas explosion without a fire immediately. But this term gas clap and the clap means that just clap was using more and more and more and more, and look again that it was using again more after Putin came to power in 2012, and journalists were instructed to use it instead of explosion or together. So you are, just imagine, you are a Russian journalist, you are living, I don't know, a city of Tula. Something happened, for example, yesterday there was explosion of gas in house number 7. But you cannot write in news like that. Your editor instructed you to write news and to put gas clap instead of explosion. Because, and you ask why I should do that, and your editor is telling you, you know, Sasha, you should know. Well, nobody wants people to be terrified, so please do it, or you will be fired. I have plenty of interviews with journalists about that, how they were forced to put clap instead of gas explosion. But this is a typical example of this so-called neutralization, because this clap means nothing. And after the war happened, of course, it was impossible to mention explosion means when there was some weapon was used. So people were telling about it and writing about it as a clap. For now, in the war speech, clap, it always means that there was a strike of some weapon. Another example, I have plenty of them. It's all examples of how substitutes for fire were used. Again, it looks like you cannot use the word fire. You need to use special substitution. And in pink line, you have a very specific substitution also created in this. It was a technical term, and now it became a term of Necrospeech. And the Russian journalists were forced to write using specifically this term. And the last rule, which was applied by Russian journalists, and it was they were instructed to do so through these instructions. I called this last rule total oblivion. Let us read again. Again, the end of the March 2022. Vladimir Zelensky just gave a huge interview to Russian independent media in exile. And the Russian journalists from the state media, they were instructed how to deal with that. Good evening, ignore Zelensky interview with this alert Russian media. So don't write about it. Another example of this total oblivion. On the eve of the 100 days since the start of the special operation, do not replicate the topic 100 days of special military operation, and do not try to summarize any results. In general, please ignore all these big dates. So basically, these curators from the presidential administration, they have two meta verbs to produce the instructions. Игнорировать и минимизировать. Ignore and minimize. Minimize and ignore. Let us look how all these how all these rules were applied and why they were applied. For example, you can see here what now all the Russian citizens, they can see it like everywhere in the cities, on the bus stops, in the public sphere, even in the kindergartens. I have plenty of pictures of such type of advertisement from the kindergartens. And what is this? This is advertisement to go to the war, to be a part of the contract army. But if you will look at this advertisement, I made a very little translation of it. We can see there is no word war, and even no any military connotations. Let us read. We can guess that this is about war only because we can see guy with in the uniform and with his face covered. So Nizhny Novgorod militia. See, even without word army, not army, militia. Then new formations, no new troops, no new soldiers, no new regiment, no new formations. In Russian, it's новое формирование. It sounds senseless, nor in English, neither in Russian. You know, it's Necrospeech. Then, competent professional command, fellowship, literally fellowship of ideologically driven fighters, ambiguous combat objectives. Then a lot of big list of price tag for the life of person. And then there is small instructions how to contact the Ministry of Defense. So let us again analyze what we just saw. First of all, there is a total obliviation, total taboo. There is no war, no military, no mention of any terms connected with military or army or war. Officer, then we saw neutralization. Instead of officers and soldiers, we saw whom? We saw specialists. And instead of new soldiers, we see new formations. Also, there is two types of super euphemism. Simple super euphemism is army battalion instead of instead of army battalion, ideologically driven fighters. It's a super euphemism. But also we have a complex super euphemism, a reference to the very positive historical event. This Nizhny Novgorod militia, means volunteer army, was taken because of this very positive connotation about our glorious past, because 500 years ago, it was a militia from this town, organized by Kuzma Minin and Dmitry Pozharsky. They organized a kind of militia from peasants, and they saved Nizhny Novgorod from Polish and Lithuanian army. So they use this euphemism, super euphemism, and neutralization to write this advertisement, to invite people to fight and to pay this money without mentioning war. This is how this all this set of rule is working. The question, so we now have all this set of rules. So we have lexical rules, super euphemism, defemism. So super euphemism when you say liberated territories instead of occupied territories. Defemism when you say neo-Nazi about Ukrainians. Neutralization when you say special military operation instead of war, and avoidance when you just don't mention anything. And the main goal of this language of it's neutralization of the warfare to prove that there is no warfare. But if it is the only goal of the Necrospeech, to discuss this, I'm going to show you some experiment. Well, in this area of linguistic anthropology, people are making a lot of experiments, but one of them was designed by the group of researchers in economics. One of them, Alexei Zakharov, is and was my co-author. We were researching Russian protests together. And what they designed an experiment. What they did, they use 4,000 Russian participants, and they made a so-called survey experiment. And they did it just now, 2 months ago. So participants were randomly assigned, divided into 2 groups. And all of these groups, they got a lot of questions about their views, about their attitudes toward Putin and war and economics and politics. And also these people were asked, it's very important, what they if they donate money to some for some social needs, and if they support some type of politics, and if they would like to participate in any type of social actions or political actions. But the reframing of this question in 2 groups was different. The one group got all these questions with the use of the new speak term, special military operation instead of war. And another group got all the same set of questions with the term military conflict, because in Russian, military conflicts means военный конфликт, and it includes the same word war, which were forbidden. So because the researchers, they cannot use war because it was completely forbidden to Russia, and people were really afraid to use it. So they took another euphemistic phrase, which is relatively close to the word war. And results was following. The term specially military operation reduced anxiety, which was obvious, but it also they have also not that obvious results, that also people in this experiment who was using, so answering to the questions about special military operation, their willingness, their wish to participate in any type of political or social actions was very much more lower. So the people were less enthusiastic about participating in any type of political or social actions. And also this term special military operation, which was repeated many times during this survey experiment, increased somehow their feeling of pride. So somehow all this experiment and a couple of others, they support our main idea that all this Necrospeech, it's a way for authority not only to talk about war without like troubling people, but also it's a way to keep these people, I mean Russian citizens, away from the big politics. So I think I will stop now, and I will wait for your questions. Thank you. And again, thank you. And I'm sorry for my not ideal English.
Thank you very much. Let me just switch here so everybody can see each other. So, yeah, this is amazing. I mean, as a non-Russian speaker, this is obviously really, really important information. While at the same time, as you said, this is going on elsewhere too. And so having sort of like done this much research on this, do you, where do you see sort of the roots of this? Is this sort of like in resonance with, you know, PR and advertising? Or do you think this is more rooted in Soviet propaganda and maybe Goebbels or whatever?
It's a question of questions.
Yes.
Some of them is coming obviously from the Soviet times, yes. But also you see in the 90s, when it was like a wild period in Russia, all these guys in PR and political technology stuff, they like so-called neuro-linguistic programming, which is like total fake, but they love it. And all of them, they believe that manipulating with words, they can force people to do whatever they want. And sometimes I think that I have a feeling that, well, they know what they're doing. So they have a kind of support and academic support and help from academic papers, or maybe from academic circles. So the design of this Necrospeech is very specific. They really know how to use words.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah.
Yes, Mike?
Can you hear me, or should I go to the mic?
I could.
No, you cannot.
Okay, I'll try to do it from here. Is it better now?
Yes.
Yeah. Basically, couple of things. One thing I want to sort of thinking about what you talked, this story. Basically, there is a strange interplay of two things going on. Yes, one of them is that let's provoke sort of a rally around the flag, sort of the enthusiasm in people about what's going on in Ukraine, how we are liberating the territories, etc., etc., etc. And at the same time, there is very significant, and in my feeling, at least recently, it's predominant, actually, probably the predominant modus of things, trying to make people as bored as possible, so nothing happens. Don't watch here. Don't look here. Live your own life. Nothing interesting is going on. It's none of your business. Relax. So there is some sort of strange interplay between these two things, and they somehow manage to play between these two modes of telling people how great we are, how we are doing some sort of good and important and right things, and at the same time, oh no, don't care. It is none of your business. You just go work, buy your I don't know, new piece of furniture, and don't think about anything important, anything beyond your personal life. So there is some sort of some sort of play between these two modes, which I cannot say I totally understand. And if you can speculate somewhat around how it is decided when to use one and when to use another, and how it works in the minds of the people. And the second thing I wanted to sort of ask and throw in, I actually think that at least some other techniques were definitely pioneered by Putin regime, and maybe even, well, I actually think that for example the use of internet trolls was pioneered actually by Putin regime and then exported into many other places. And do you think there is a sort of a potential of exporting this sort of thing into sort of other dictatorships or semi-dictatorships, etc.? So these are my questions.
Cool.
Talking about the first question, yes, there is like two strategies of Russian necrolung: mobilized people and calm people. And it looks like maybe sometimes I thought that like the two groups were doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's the answer for that. Because, for example, if we measure the number of these euphemisms, super euphemisms for mobilizing, and the number of these euphemisms for, not euphemisms, for neutralization stuff for calm people, we found out that basically in the newspapers, in the federal newspapers, state newspapers like Interfax, TASS, Interfax, federal media, and so on, RIA Novosti, there is a main strategy to calm people. So they were using these super euphemisms, but in a very modest number. And for example, Vladimir Solovyov, who is a very famous Russian propagandist, and he has a very popular TV show in the prime time in the first channel. He's using only euphemisms about enemies and a euphemism about us. And he's always mobilizing people, explaining that a second war is going on, everybody should fight, Russia in the circle of enemies is around us, especially in the Baltic countries, and so on and so on. So basically there are different strategies. It looks like there are two different policies inside the presidential administration, and they cannot make an agreement which should be first and which should be second, and how to communicate with each other. So in this case, this Russian newspeak is not like a language of Nazi propaganda described by Viktor Klemperer in his book LTI, because the language LTI, it's full of aggression.
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, it's full of, well, we have, you know what, you know where, please don't talk about it and be happy. That's the kind of necroyas Putin administration used in general.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that is super interesting. I mean, there's this kind of like the question is like, if the same, you know, are these two instruments in the same orchestra, or are these two pieces of music? That's a really, really weird way to look at it, right? Isn't it?
Yes. And for example, there was a scandal. Well, as you know, Russian schools have already 2 years. They have so-called разговоры о важном, that talks about the important stuff. And this is a propagandistic lessons. So every week, kids should come and listen to some propagandistic stuff. And the Ministry of Education, they prepared every week, they prepared a PowerPoint presentation with slides with the main topic for this week.
Wow.
What is important this week? And in the last year, in the autumn of 2023, they prepared a lesson about special military operation, and specifically about our heroes, how our heroes are fighting at the liberated territories, and how they're liberating them, and about a young boy who was fighting single against 5 American tanks, and how he was killed there, and about a young girl named Masha, who was she was a paramedic, and she was trying to save him. For all the kids. Then suddenly, this lesson disappeared, and another slides appeared. There was no mention in war at all. There was all about how nice our country is and how nature is good and so on. So 2 tragedies.
Crazy. Mike had a second question, which is, do you also think that other techniques, like, of one, I think internet trolling is probably not a technique, but there is like a set of techniques of internet trolling. Do you think that this is sort of like part of, now let me extend the paradigm, if we have 2 instruments or the same piece of music, like, would this be part of the same orchestra, basically?
Oh, my question was basically, is this Necrospeech techniques, are they translatable into the world outside Russia? Are they usable for other dictatorships, and is there any evidence for that?
Yes, they are. There are a lot of complaints, and even, I don't know, we're not complaints like text of horror from my colleagues, journalists from Kazakhstan. They are complaining a lot that last 2 years, Kazakhstan news, they start to have the same set of rules. Basically, when media, specifically state media, are trying to describe some non-pleasant events. So they were using neutralization and euphemism and euphemism and big proportions. So on my colleagues from Kazakhstan, they're complaining that it came from Russia. And the same is happening in Belarus, but in this case, I don't know if they have their own system or they borrowed from Russia. But in the case of Kazakhstan, they definitely borrowing that from Russia. And the same could happen in Georgia.
Like, having lived in the US for 10 years and following what's happening there, it strikes me in terms of, there may not be, actually, that's not true. I'm hesitant to saying there's less central organization, but actually, if you look at CPAC and, the sort of rhetorics of sort of like Agenda 2025, how Roe v. Wade was sort of like, made to fall, or what happened in the last week with the transgender law case at the Supreme Court, where, you don't have like transgender, you have men in bathrooms, right? You don't have sort of women that need an abortion, you have sort of like murder, right? Like, and these kind of things, which are very clearly also, you have 2 sort of like languages, which has been shown by former Open Lab seminar speaker Filippo Menzer. There's this kind of thing that, like, the Republicans and Democrats use the same word but mean completely different things, for example. So do you think that this is sort of also in existence, that there is a kind of like, in a polarized political situation, which in this case is not left versus right, but sort of like governing versus not governing, or governing versus imaginary. Is that sort of something where, besides something which clearly seems to be driven by sort of like top down, is there something where people sort of like just adopt the technique and this becomes this kind of like, you know, sort of like a virus, something that's sort of like playing itself out with people sort of adopting these kind of like weird notions?
Well, manipulating exists everywhere and always. Even in ancient Rome, it was a popular manner of rhetoric. But there are always buts. In the Russian, so in the United States, yes, we have a magnificent examples of manipulations, like you just show us. The problem is that in the case of Russia, if you don't follow those rules, you will be punished, and punished very severe. I didn't mention it, but this curator from the presidential administration office, who was sent these instructions to the journalist in this newspaper, he was making threats that if they don't do it, they will lose their salary for the whole year. And if they will do it the second time, they will be fined by the Russian court. And as you may know, 2 fines, and you will have a criminal case against you, and you can be in prison for 7 years. And there are plenty of cases, a lot of journalists now sitting in the prison specifically because they don't follow these rules of manipulation. So this is a big difference. Manipulation exists everywhere, but here we have manipulation and a set of and the criminal and the way to punish people for not following these rules. This is a second step.
So this is basically like saying it's not Fox News, but it's Fox News, and if you don't speak like Fox News, you will be punished and go to jail. Basically.
Yeah, that's like that. Yes.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's definitely completely different dimension. I mean, this.
Yeah, and it's actually significantly different dimension from what was in Russia like 3-4 years ago. Before the war, you can, if you are ready to lose your job and to lose your sort of good salary and sort of go on your own into some freelancing or whatever, it was easier. Right now, it is definitely on the level of you will be in prison.
Just give me one example. There is a there is a deputy who is now sitting in the prison, Gorinov. He got 7 years in prison, and now he will get more, it looks like, because when he was a deputy in his municipal, in the meeting of the municipal deputies, it's a very, very low level. So it's like they were in charge on 1 district of Moscow. So basically they can decide nothing. And they had their regular meeting after the war started, and they were discussing how to organize. The topic of their meeting was how to organize children feast, children celebration day at this district. And Gorinov, he said, colleagues, maybe we don't, maybe it's maybe we shouldn't organize a children holiday, children feast, because it's not a time for celebration in the time of war. That was enough. Now he's in prison for 7 years.
Wow. Okay. Great. So there is one thing which sort of like, you know, blew me away when I saw your plots. You said this is very interesting. So basically, these are n-gram plots from, like, frequency plots from the news, right? And
Yes.
the fact, these typically, you know, like, broader audiences, digital humanities may know these plots and criticize them because usually they come with a linear y-axis. But this is coming with a log y-axis. And so all these newly introduced terms, they go up sort of 2, 3, 4, 5 orders of magnitude. And so they really get into the realm, but not quite typically of the established term. But still, this is like in this particular case, and you had another one, which was the one before, the new term sort of made it into the popularity scale that the term had that the original term had at the beginning. I think it was actually the next one, the one you just showed. Yes, so you see this is like around 0.001, and the other one sort of makes it up there briefly, while the other one also grows in sort of frequency half an order of magnitude. So there is a really interesting notion. These things, they're very clearly very, very well established. So is this due to the fact that we're talking main news, or is it just in the news and people in the regular life don't use these terms that much, or is that something where there's really like the sea change also happening in people's minds? Because the effect is crazy. I mean, this is like, you know, what comes to mind is the frequency change of Churchill and Hitler during World War II is similar. Like you have, like, Hitler doesn't exist and then it comes to be and like fluctuates around something. And Churchill sort of does exist before because there's other people who are sort of like known and called Churchill, but he grows like 2 orders of magnitude. And that is sort of something which is rare. Like if you just look for random words doing this is like, this is not just happening, right? So this is really a crazy effect. And this is just like, you know, I don't know how to translate this in a question, but like, I think this is a really crazy thing to find. Like, how do you find these words actually? How do you identify them? Is this sort of like case specific, or have you thought about like, you know, looking at all words and just see like what swims up?
That is the biggest part of my research. So I basically ask people what they noticed, and they send me strange substitutes. And then I research the substitutes, and I'm trying to decide if there's a special manipulation or not. But this pair became very famous. Very famous, like an example, because for now, after the Russian invasion to Ukraine, it was impossible to say strike of rocket, bomb from drone, all this stuff is just like that. And it came to the vernacular speech too, because people are asking together, did you hear clap? And it means explosion. So I'm listening how people are talking, and I'm reading a lot of news, and I'm trying to figure out how people, how journalists specifically are like RIA Novosti, because it's very the best media for research. Necrospeech. It's a main federal newspaper, news agency. They full of this crap. And I was like, I don't know how to say it. I'm making metrics, the table.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I'm making the table and I put all these phrases in table and I see how they are changing. For many of these cases, possible to trace dynamics, for example, front and a line of contact appears only in last 3 years.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But for example, gas explosion and gas clap, it was before. So I can show you dynamic.
Interesting.
Yeah, very interesting.
So one other question I have, which is related, which is sort of like following up on what Mike brought up, where he asked a question if this is exportable. But he made the statement that internet trolling is sort of something which seems to be at least pushed, if not pioneered or invented by the Putin regime. So one of the key questions that, like one thing that comes to mind here is sort of like how Twitter was sort of like filled with bots approximately fall 2015. And there, the interesting thing was, it was not sort of like words that were placed, which assume some kind of rationality still, like, you know, even if it's like bending rationality, but there's still sort of some meaning going on. But sort of like this thing that you sort of fill the space with bullshit, you know, like which you also have like with Donald Trump saying one thing and the exact opposite at the same time on the same day, and then one sticks and he runs with that. Or, you know, like feeding voters, like recently Kamala Harris saying, you'd say to one set of voters, Kamala Harris is against Palestinians, and down the street, you say to Jewish voters, Kamala Harris is against Jews. Like this kind of like targeted thing, which on Twitter was like all sorts of things have been said. And this is sort of something which can be measured and has been seen in terms of destabilization and is obviously very, very evident in like whatever Donald Trump says. But this sort of like notion of bullshit induction, which by the way, we discussed sort of like 3 weeks ago here, could that be another one of these, let me call it generating mechanisms that you have here, like super euphemism, dysphemism, neutralization, you call it oblivion, but basically this is good old Roman damnatio memoriae, right? So this is crazy. So this is like around since 2000 years. Could you imagine that this sort of like bullshit induction is another one of these phenomena which are systematically sort of like pursued by people who obviously have a really good idea of what they're not only good with words, they're also really good with frequency distributions, it seems like.
Yes, maybe yes, because all these trolls, as you already mentioned, there was like come to your blog and they're writing in comments absolutely opposite things. So they made, so they got so this effect. So people, they don't want to discuss it anymore because they're drowned in these different opinions. Very aggressive too. So, and basically, as I already mentioned, the main goal and the main profit of Necrospeech is to distance people from the politics, from the solution making. So, and this policy of using trolls, of course, it's one of the weapon of Necrospeech. The problem is that I really don't know how to study it, how to research it. It's much more complicated. And I need, I don't know, another technique to research it.
Yes, like, you know, sort of like what people who have studied this is one of the interesting things. Like whenever I see this, I have the feeling it's like with art forgery. The moment you identify it, then obviously, you know, basically it's much harder to sort of like communicate it to a broader audience of like how people are cheated. If you communicate how people are cheated, then obviously the cheaters have another tool in their tool set, basically, right? So it's this thing which I think is a really difficult thing to do. But yeah, so what I thank you very much. This is sort of like Yeah, super insightful. You have another 4 minutes, I guess. If there is no other questions, I would like to sort of like conclude the session in your presence, which always means that I have to talk about the next session also. So next Monday we will have Iyad Rahwan from the Max Planck Institute. He will talk about machine culture. And so the idea is there that, you know, one thing he did was like basically the trolley problem, but imagine it's a machine that has to make the decision. And there is a lot of resonance going on with cultural data analytics. So there is several collaborations of people who were in our group that are now working with people there. They also have been very early inspired by what we're doing. So this is more about image similarity, sort of evolution of images and stuff like that. But it's also not irrelevant here. And this will be the 5th keynote in sort of like an ensemble of keynotes, which this is number 4. And let me just throw a tentacle, which I think is quite interesting, which is like we started this sort of like season, so to speak, with Jevin West and Carl Bergstrom, who have this course Calling Bullshit in the Age of Big Data, where we, in the discussion, not in the talk itself, but in the discussion, we actually had a similar sort of like moment when we talked about bullshit induction and sort of like trying to figure out who's behind that. And we got very close to that today. Which, and let me bring this up again in a sort of very qualitative way, while also using a method which has been criticized in the past in digital humanities from the start, when it was introduced, like how to read 1 million books based on the Google Ngram Finder. This was sort of something which was not welcomed very much in digital humanities, but has become a method in cultural data analytics. With caution, where people actually sort of like look at how the data is sort of like, you know, how it is biased, what is the corpus and so on. But what we learned from all this is that these plots make more sense on a logarithmic axis than on a linear axis. And you, Alexandra, brought an amazing example of sort of like a whole set of cases where you can see why this should be done and why people should look at this, because this is sort of something which sort of affects us all. And this is ironically sort of cool that the rules are so simple, like the rules used by those influencers are so simple, but also the frequency statistics to actually analyze this is sort of not that hard, right? So this is sort of something which is quite interesting. In the same way, we can show that Oxford University Press and Google Ngram is more frequent than the word awesome. Here we can see that sort of the frequency of such, you know, terms that didn't mean anything before now become like sort of, you know, in the same order of magnitude, on the same level than the original term. So war is replaced with sort of some word that sort of bores the audience. So thank you very much again. This was really exceptional, and I hope we meet very soon. Thank you very much in person.
Thank you. I hope too, and happy Christmas and New Year. So it's coming up. So I hope that the next year will be better.